17 minutes after my father was taken into emergency surgery, I heard my own voice on a live stream. It sounded calm, calmer than I had ever been in my life. I, Maya Reed, voluntarily resign from the board of Voxline Labs and temporarily transfer the voting authority attached to my 42% ownership stake to the company's CEO, Logan Pierce. On the screen, my husband stood under bright stage lights. He wore a charcoal suit. The Voxline logo filled the screen behind him. Investors, reporters, and board members sat in front of the stage. Meanwhile, I was sitting outside an operating room in an old sweater I had thrown on that morning. The version of me in the live stream continued. Because of long-term differences that cannot be resolved, I have also decided to end my marriage to Logan Pierce. I stared at my phone as my fingers slowly went cold. It was my voice, the same tone, the same pacing, even the slight pause I always made before saying the word marriage. But I had never said those words. I had never recorded that statement. No one around me knew that while I waited to learn whether my father would survive, my husband was using my voice to resign from my company, hand over my voting rights, and announce my divorce to the entire internet. My phone vibrated. A message from Logan appeared. "Don't respond publicly yet. I'll explain after the board vote." I almost laughed. 10 minutes earlier, I had called him 6 times. My father had suffered a serious heart rhythm problem and had been rushed into surgery. Logan had not answered once, but now he finally had time to contact me. Not to ask about my father, not to ask where I was. He only wanted to make sure I didn't interfere with his vote. I pressed the button to record a voice message. I wanted to demand an explanation, but when the recording started, I couldn't speak. I just listened to myself breathe. That was when fear finally hit me. If they could copy my voice this perfectly, how many people would ever believe the real me again? My name is Maya Reed. I was 32 years old, and 7 years earlier, Logan and I had founded Voxline Labs together. Voxline was an artificial intelligence company focused on voice technology. Our original goal was simple. We wanted to help people who had lost the ability to speak recover a voice that sounded like their own. Stroke survivors, people living with ALS, patients who had undergone surgery on their throat or vocal cords. With a small number of old recordings, we could build a personal voice model for them. The idea began with my father. Elliot Reed owned a small community radio station on an old street north of Seattle. For more than 30 years, he recorded the voices of ordinary people, cab drivers working late at night, college students living alone for the first time, older people grieving the loss of a partner, and callers who couldn't tell their families the truth, but could say it anonymously on a midnight radio show. I grew up inside that studio. Some people remember others through photographs. I remembered people through sound. I could tell when my father was truly happy, and when he was only pretending so I wouldn't worry. I could tell when someone said "I'm fine" and actually meant it, and I could tell when they were barely holding themselves together. In college, I studied linguistics and computer science. Logan studied business. We met at a startup competition. My demonstration program crashed in the middle of my presentation. Everyone in the audience was waiting. I was so nervous I could barely hold the mouse. Then Logan stood up from the crowd, walked onto the stage, and handed me his laptop. "Use mine." I asked why he was helping me. He said, "Because your project deserves to be heard." I remembered that sentence for years. We didn't win the competition, but Logan bought me coffee afterward. We stayed in the cafe until it closed. I understood the technology. He knew how to make people believe in its potential. A year later, we officially started the company. Our first office had 2 desks. The heat broke every winter. We couldn't afford professional recording equipment, so we borrowed my father's studio after midnight. I wrote code while Logan slept on an old couch. When he woke up, he went to an all-night diner and brought me coffee. Back then, I truly believed we were perfect for each other. I could hear the emotion inside a voice. He could make people see the future. When our first funding round failed, my father mortgaged the apartment above his radio station and loaned us $150,000. He had only one condition. The station's 30 years of recordings could be used only for non-commercial research. Any new use would require fresh permission from both the station and the people in those recordings. I personally wrote that restriction into the agreement. Logan signed it too, he said. "A person's voice belongs to them. That should always be our company's foundation." Later I married him. Then the company grew. We moved into a glass office tower downtown. Our team grew from 2 people to more than 200. Logan started doing interviews constantly. The media loved him. He was handsome, confident, and good at turning complicated technology into a simple emotional story. Reporters always asked him the same question: "Why did you create Voxline?" He would look into the camera and say, "Because everyone deserves to own their own voice." I was the one who had originally said that, but I never corrected him. I didn't like cameras. I wasn't comfortable giving speeches. As long as the company kept doing good work, I didn't care who stood on the stage. My official title was Chief Language Technology Officer, but as Voxline grew, I appeared less and less in its public materials. Logan told me it was better for the technical team. He said investors wanted to see one clear leader. He said if both founders spoke publicly, the market might not know who to trust. I believed him. He stood in front. I stayed behind the scenes. I built the core voice models. I handled data permissions. I reviewed ethical risks. Logan handled fundraising, interviews, and corporate partnerships. From the outside, we still looked like the perfect team. Then, 10 months ago, Celeste Ward joined the company. Celeste had dated Logan in college. They had been together for 2 years. Then she moved to New York, and Logan stayed in Seattle. He told me it had ended long ago. When Celeste returned, she was a partner at a major investment firm. Her firm was willing to invest $80 million in Voxline. There was one condition: Celeste would personally become our chief operating officer. The first time I met her in the conference room, she wore a white suit. She shook my hand and smiled. "I've wanted to meet you for years. Logan always says you're the quiet genius behind the company." It sounded like a compliment. But I didn't like the way she said quiet, as if it wasn't part of my personality, as if it was the place where I belonged. After Celeste joined Voxline, things began changing quickly. She reorganized the leadership team. She removed me from weekly product meetings. She transferred the ethics review team out of my department and placed it under her control. I asked Logan why. He said the company was preparing to go public and needed to move faster. "You make everything too complicated. Celeste understands the capital markets. Let her handle this. You can focus on the technology." I reminded him that voice data could not be treated like ordinary corporate property. Logan sighed. "Maya, we're not two people working above your father's radio station anymore. The company has grown up." That night, he didn't come home. He said he and Celeste had to work through the night on a financing proposal. After that, it happened more often. Meetings at 2 in the morning, weekend business trips, events in New York and San Francisco. The media began calling Logan and Celeste Voxline's power duo. Someone commented under one of their photos, "They look more like a married couple than he and his actual wife." I saw the comment. I never told Logan. I didn't want to look like a jealous wife who questioned her marriage because of something written online. We had survived the poorest and hardest years together. I believed a real relationship should be stronger than a few pictures. Then, 3 months ago, I discovered a secret project called Mirror. Mirror was not a normal voice restoration tool. It could use a large collection of past recordings to imitate how a person spoke in different emotional states: angry, afraid, heartbroken, uncertain. It could even recreate the breathing pattern someone used when they were lying. The first time I saw the testing records, I demanded that the project stop immediately. Mirror was not using only voice samples that people had knowingly uploaded. It was also using customer service calls, meeting recordings, old interviews, and private voice messages sent by employees. Celeste told me all of that data is stored on company servers. "If it's stored in our system, the company has the right to use it." I answered, "Storage is not consent." She gave me a small smile. "That would look good in a marketing brochure." After the meeting, Logan asked me to stay. He closed the door. His voice was already impatient. "Celeste is helping us secure the most important funding round before the public offering. You can't stand up and say no every time we try to move forward. If a project is illegal, I have to say no." "It isn't illegal." "Then why are you afraid to tell the users?" Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because ordinary people don't understand technology. Once the product succeeds, they'll accept it." I looked at him and felt like I was speaking to a stranger. 7 years earlier, he had said people owned their voices. Now he believed that if the result was successful enough, consent no longer mattered. That night, I reviewed every corporate document connected to my ownership. I held 42% of the company because I had created most of Voxline's core technology. The company bylaws also gave me special veto power. Any project that expanded how voice data could be used required my written approval. Without my signature, Mirror could not legally be released. 2 weeks earlier, Logan had begun asking me to sign a new authorization agreement. He called it a routine update. I refused. After that, he became colder. Celeste appeared between us more often. The morning my father collapsed, he called me. His voice sounded wrong. He asked whether I had recently authorized Voxline to permanently use all the recordings in the radio station archive. I said no. My father was silent for a long time. Then he told me someone had sent the station an acquisition notice. The document claimed the station had agreed to permanently transfer 30 years of recordings to Voxline. It contained his electronic signature. It also contained mine. Neither of us had signed it. I told him not to touch anything and that I was coming over. Less than an hour later, his neighbor called. My father had collapsed in the studio. By the time I reached the hospital, he had already been taken into emergency surgery. The doctors said his heart rhythm was dangerously unstable. They had to operate immediately. I sat outside the operating room and called Logan again and again. He never answered. Later, I learned that he and Celeste were in a secret board meeting. They planned to approve Mirror that night. Because I had refused to authorize it, they had chosen another solution. They used Mirror to copy my voice. Then they used Voxline's own voice authentication system to approve the documents remotely. The statement in the live stream was not only meant to humiliate me, it was designed to convince the board that I had willingly stepped away. Once the vote ended, Celeste's firm would officially invest. Logan would keep his position as CEO. Mirror would receive commercial approval, and the public would believe that I was simply a founder and wife who had chosen to walk away. I saved a copy of the live stream. Then I called someone I had not spoken to in 3 years, Noah Bennett. Noah had been one of Voxline's first security engineers. He had also been my research partner in college. 4 years earlier, he had strongly opposed the amount of voice data the company was collecting. He and Logan had a major argument. Noah resigned soon afterward. Before leaving, he said something to me. Technology doesn't hurt people by itself. The real danger comes from people who believe they have the right to make choices for everyone else. At the time, I thought he was overreacting. I didn't support him during the board meeting. When he answered my call, Noah didn't ask why I had suddenly contacted him. I played the live stream statement. He listened for less than 20 seconds. That isn't you. How can you tell? When you speak in long sentences, you take a small breath before the third stressed word. This voice imitates your breathing, but every pause is too clean. It sounds like you, but it doesn't hesitate like you do. For the first time in my life, the word hesitate made me feel safe. The pauses I had always considered a weakness were part of what made my voice mine. Noah asked me to send him the original live stream file. Then he asked, "Are you safe right now?" Not what happened to the company, not why Logan had done it. He asked whether I was safe. "I'm at the hospital. My father is still in surgery." Noah paused. "I'm coming. You don't need to. Maya, I'm not coming to make the decision for you. I'm bringing equipment. What you do next is still your choice." An hour later, Noah arrived. His jacket was soaked from the rain, and he carried 2 computers. We sat near the vending machines. After examining the live stream audio, he confirmed that the statement was synthetic. More disturbing, the voice model carried an early internal marker. Only an experimental version of Mirror that I had helped develop used that marker. That meant they had not created my voice from public interviews. They had used private recordings stored inside the company. Those recordings included work meetings, family messages, and even voice files I had uploaded to the employee mental health system during therapy. My stomach turned. They listened to those recordings? Noah didn't answer immediately. His face told me enough. He turned the computer toward me. The system logs showed that someone using Celeste's administrative access had downloaded more than 400 hours of my private audio over the previous 2 months. One folder was labeled Maya Emotional Range. My sadness, my anger, my fear, my uncertainty, my most private and vulnerable moments had been sorted and stored so they could build a more convincing version of my voice. I asked Noah, "Is this enough to cancel the vote?" Technically, yes. Legally, we still need a complete chain of evidence. The full server records are inside the company. I can't get in anymore. Noah looked at me. "Then don't tell them how much you know yet." At 11 that night, my father finally came out of surgery. The doctor said he was stable, but the next few days would be critical. I stayed outside his room. At 1 in the morning, Logan finally arrived. He wasn't alone. Celeste came with him. She stood behind him holding a tablet. Logan walked toward me. There was very little guilt on his face. He looked more like a man who had just finished a difficult meeting. The vote passed. Those were the first words he said to me. I stared at him. My father just had heart surgery. The doctor told me he's stable. So now you think it's time to talk about the company? Logan lowered his voice. Maya, tonight's decision affected 200 employees. I couldn't put all of their jobs at risk because of a family emergency. I asked, what was that voice in the live stream? He didn't deny it. He just looked around the hallway. Let's discuss this somewhere private. I didn't move. Celeste finally spoke. The statement was only a temporary measure. The company needed to finish the vote. Once the funding is complete, you can return to the technical team. I turned toward her. You used my voice to remove me, and now you're telling me I can come back? Her expression did not change. No one was trying to hurt you. Logan reached toward my shoulder. I stepped away. You cloned my voice. Mirror is our technology. My voice is not company property. You're a founder of the company. So? He hesitated. Then he said the words that ended everything. So you should understand what's best for the company. That was when I finally understood him. He knew what he had done was wrong. He simply believed the company mattered more than my choice. His plan mattered more than my consent. The version of my future he had designed mattered more than the real me. I asked, was the divorce statement also for the company? Logan frowned. That was only to convince the board that you wouldn't continue interfering with the project. Once everything settles down, we can issue a correction. You're going to tell people we aren't getting divorced? If you're willing to cooperate, I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed that entire day. Logan, you aren't just copying my voice, you're trying to live my life for me. He looked at me as though he could not understand why that was a problem. Celeste reminded him that reporters were still waiting for a follow-up statement. Before leaving, Logan told me, don't do anything impulsive. We'll deal with this when we get home. I said nothing because I already knew we would never share a home again. My father woke up the next morning. He was weak. But the first thing he said was, the recordings are safe. I leaned closer. He explained that the radio station kept an offline backup of every important archive. It was stored in a bank safe deposit box. The box contained the original licensing agreement, the master recording list, and complete technical records from the first time Voxline trained its models. He had also saved a box of old family tapes recorded by my mother. My mother died when I was 14. The tapes included her singing in the kitchen and calling me by my childhood nickname. None of those recordings had ever been uploaded online. They existed only in the station's offline archive. My father took my hand. Before the acquisition papers arrived, someone entered the old archive room. The security camera recorded Celeste. She took several hard drives. My chest tightened. My father looked at me. Do you remember what your mother used to tell you? Of course I remembered. As a child, I was afraid of giving the wrong answer. Whenever someone asked me a question, I looked at my mother's face first. She would touch my hair and say, Maybird, count to 5, then answer in your own voice. Maybird was the nickname she had given me. Only my parents and I knew it. My father gave me the key to the safe deposit box. Don't let them take your voice. That afternoon, Noah, my attorney Tessa, and I opened the box. The original licensing agreement was inside. It clearly stated that the radio archive could only be used for non-commercial research designed to help people who had lost the ability to speak. Any commercial product, advertising system, customer service tool, or large-scale AI training project required new and clear permission from every person in the recordings. The contract also contained a termination clause. If Voxline expanded the use of the recordings without permission, the radio station could immediately withdraw all rights. More importantly, we found a backup copy of the security footage showing Celeste removing the hard drives. She thought she had deleted the recording, but my father's old system automatically saved every video to a second offline machine. The footage was clear. Celeste entered the archive room at 1 in the morning. Logan waited outside the door. He had not simply known about it. He had taken part in it. Noah uncovered something else. The Mirror team planned to launch a product called Companion at a major event 3 days later. It would not only imitate the voices of users' deceased loved ones, It could also study a user's emotional state and say whatever was most likely to influence them. The marketing team called it an AI that truly understood you, but the real meaning was much darker. The system could use your most vulnerable recordings to figure out when you were easiest to persuade. Celeste planned to sell the technology to insurance companies, lenders, and advertisers. Logan knew. He had not only approved it, he had ordered the team to release it faster. I asked Noah, "What happens if I release the evidence now?" "They'll claim the documents are disputed. Celeste's firm will launch a full public relations campaign. Tessa can request an emergency court order, but the judge may not stop the launch before the event. Then we'll make them prove it themselves." Noah studied me. "What are you planning?" I picked up one of my mother's tapes. "I'm going to make that machine say something it should never know." The launch took place in a downtown Seattle theater. More than 1,000 people attended. The event was also broadcast around the world. Voxline had designed the stage to feel warm and comforting. No cold machines. Just a living room, soft lighting, old photographs, and an empty chair that represented companionship. Logan stood on stage and introduced Companion. He said the product could let people hear the voices of loved ones they had lost. It could help lonely people feel less alone. It could make sure no voice ever truly disappeared. People in the audience cried. He made it sound beautiful. That had always been Logan's greatest talent. He turned other people's emotions into his own stage. Celeste came out next. She announced that Voxline would bring Companion into hospitals, schools, and homes within 5 years. A digital woman appeared on the screen. It did not look exactly like me. But the eyes, the mouth, and the expressions were close. Celeste said, to demonstrate Companion's emotional understanding, we used anonymized voice data provided by one of our early researchers. Anonymized. I sat in the 7th row and listened as people around me praised how natural the voice sounded. It was my voice. Slightly altered and presented to the world as a product. Logan began a live demonstration. "What is your name?" The digital figure answered, "You can call me M. What is your most important purpose?" "To understand you, support you, and give you the response you need most." The audience applauded. I stood at first. No one noticed me. Then a camera turned in my direction. My face appeared on the main screen. The theater slowly became quiet. When Logan saw me, he paused, but he quickly recovered and smiled. Maya is also with us today. She was one of Voxline's early technical founders. One of the early technical founders, as if I had only been a minor member of the original team. A staff member tried to stop me from approaching the stage. Tessa had already given the event organizers documents proving my shareholder status. They had no legal reason to remove me. I walked onto the stage and took another microphone. Logan spoke quietly. "What are you doing?" "Running a test." I turned toward the digital system. "Do you know who I am?" The figure answered, "You are Maya Reed, co-founder of Voxline Labs. Have you listened to my private recordings?" It paused. "I can only access authorized training data." People in the audience began whispering. I continued, "When I was 14, what question was I most afraid people would ask me?" The system stayed silent for 2 seconds, then it answered in my mother's voice. "You were most afraid when people asked what you wanted to be when you grew up." My hand began shaking around the microphone. I already knew what the system would say, but hearing my mother's voice come out of that machine almost made it impossible to continue. That was not a public recording. It had never been part of Voxline's original research data. It came from a private family tape. I asked another question. "What did my mother call me when I was afraid to answer?" Logan's face lost all color. Celeste rushed toward the control station. She tried to end the demonstration. Noah had already locked the public interface. The digital voice continued. "Maybird." The theater became completely silent. "Count to 5. Then answer in your own voice." I closed my eyes. I had not heard that voice in more than a decade, but it never should have been inside that machine. I turned to the audience. This recording was never made public. My mother died 18 years ago. The original tape has always been stored in my father's offline radio archive. Voxline never received permission to use it. The screen changed. Security footage showed Celeste entering the archive room. Then it showed Logan waiting outside the door. Next came the server records proving that the Mirror team had accessed my private therapy recordings. Finally, the screen played the fake statement that had resigned from my company and announced my divorce. Noah displayed the audio patterns from the real and synthetic versions of my voice. He did not overwhelm the audience with technical language. He explained one simple fact. I had never made that statement. It had been created using Voxline's internal voice model. People in the audience began shouting questions. Reporters stood up at the same time. Celeste rushed toward Logan. "You said she would never find out." Logan answered immediately. "You managed the project. I never approved the theft of private recordings." Celeste stared at him. Then she laughed. "Now you're going to blame everything on me?" She played a recording from her phone. This time, the voice was really Logan's. "Use Maya's model to complete the authorization. She won't sign right now. Once the funding is complete, I'll make her accept it." Celeste's recorded voice asked, "What if she objects publicly?" Logan answered, "She won't. She always chooses to protect the company. Even if she gets angry, she always forgives me." After the recording ended, Logan said nothing. There was no one left for him to blame. Celeste had turned against him the same way he had turned against me, not because she suddenly developed a conscience. Their relationship had always been built on personal gain, and when two people only stay together because of what they can get, danger makes them protect themselves first. The launch was cancelled. Within 2 hours, Celeste's investment firm announced that it was suspending the deal. The board froze Logan's executive authority. That evening, a judge issued a temporary order preventing Voxline from using the radio archive or any of my private voice data. The following day, federal and state regulators opened investigations. The next few weeks were some of the most chaotic of my life. Many people online supported me. Others said I had destroyed a promising technology company. Employees wrote to me. They said they were ordinary engineers who had no idea what senior leadership had done. If Voxline collapsed, they could lose their health insurance, their homes, or even their right to stay in the country. I had believed I would have no problem letting the company disappear. But when I stood inside the office and looked at the people who had worked as many sleepless nights as I had, I couldn't treat them all like Logan. A company could do something wrong without every employee being guilty. So I proposed a different plan. Logan and Celeste would permanently leave the leadership team. Mirror would be shut down. All unauthorized data would be deleted. Voxline would accept independent auditing. Every user would be allowed to see how their voice had been used and request deletion at any time. No voice model could generate new speech without the person's knowledge. The company would no longer be controlled by one CEO. Researchers, user representatives, and independent ethics experts would share authority over major decisions. The board asked me to become CEO. I refused, not because I lacked the ability. I no longer needed Logan's position to prove I was better than him. I chose to become chair of the Technology and Ethics Council. I continued doing the work I truly cared about. But this time, my name appeared on the first page, not hidden in an attachment. After my father recovered, he returned to his radio station. His first new program was about consent. He said, "Real consent is not the absence of an argument. It means someone understands what is happening and can safely say no." Listeners began calling in. One woman said her partner constantly made decisions for her. Another caller said his family used the words, "I'm doing this for your own good," to pressure him into accepting a life he did not want. A woman in her 70s said she had been married for 48 years and only chose her own vacation destination for the first time after her husband died. I listened from outside the studio. That was when I understood that what Logan had done was not only a technology crime. He had been making decisions for me for years. He decided where I should stand inside the company. He decided that I should accept Celeste. He decided when I was allowed to be angry. Eventually, he even decided what my voice should say. 3 months later, the investigation ended. Celeste was charged with data theft, illegal access to medical records, and commercial fraud. Logan admitted that he had approved the fake voice authorization. He did not spend many years in prison, but he lost his position, control of his shares, and the professional licenses that had allowed him to lead the company. Our divorce was finalized, too. He wrote me a long letter. He said he had never wanted to lose me. He said he had been terrified that the company would fail. He said he believed that if the result was successful, I would eventually understand. I read the letter. I did not answer. A few days later, he waited for me outside my father's radio station. It was the first time we had been alone since our separation. Logan looked thinner. He was not wearing a suit. There was no attorney beside him. I know I don't have the right to ask you to forgive me, he said, but I need to know whether there is truly no chance left for us. I looked at the man who had shared 7 years of my life. I remembered the tiny office with 2 desks. I remembered the day he handed me his laptop, and I remembered sitting in the hospital listening to a false version of my voice, feeling as if someone had pushed me out of my own body. I can forgive you, I said. Hope appeared in his eyes. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm coming back. I don't want to live with hatred. But I will never give myself back to someone who believes he has the right to choose for me. Logan lowered his head. I really did love you, I know, but eventually you loved the version of me you could control more. She never disagreed with you. She never disappointed you. She never stopped your plans. But she was never real. After Logan left, I cried for a long time. Not because I regretted my decision. A relationship can need to end without every beautiful part of it being a lie. We had loved each other once. But somewhere along the way, he began loving my silence, and I became afraid of breaking the version of me he preferred. The most painful part of ending a relationship is not always discovering that the other person never loved you. Sometimes it is admitting that they did love you once, but never learned how to keep respecting you. Noah did not try to date me immediately after the divorce. In fact, he almost never discussed romance. When we worked together, he focused on servers, permission systems, and security. He was not very good at comforting people. When I worried about my father's health, Noah never said, "Everything will be okay." He simply made a list of every restaurant near the hospital that stayed open 24 hours and reminded me to eat. One night, we were working past midnight. I asked him, "Did you leave Voxline partly because I didn't support you?" He kept looking at his screen. "Partly."
Did you blame me? For a while? And now I understand that you trusted your husband. That doesn't mean you wanted anyone to get hurt? That still sounds like you're making excuses for me. He shook his head. I'm not saying you had no responsibility. I'm saying you can admit you made a mistake without deciding your entire life was a mistake.
That stayed with me. For years, I thought being wrong left only 2 choices: prove that I had not been wrong, or believe that I was a terrible person. Noah showed me a third choice: admit it, fix what I could, then move forward. 8 months later, we started a nonprofit project together. We called it Own Voice. It helped ordinary people check whether their voices had been used for AI training without permission. We also helped families preserve private recordings. Every recording came with clear instructions: who could listen to it, how long it could be stored, whether family members could continue using it after the speaker died. Every choice belonged to the person who had made the recording. My father hosted the launch event. He stood at the microphone and introduced me as the founder. Not Logan's wife, not the woman behind Voxline, just Maya Reed. For the first time, I told my entire story at a public event. I paused several times. I forgot a few words. At one point, I drank too quickly and nearly started coughing. But when I finished, everyone stood. Noah was at the back of the room. He wasn't recording me. He was simply watching me and smiling. After the event, we stayed behind to pack the equipment. He suddenly asked, "Are you free Friday night? Is it work?" "No." "Then what is it?" He looked uncomfortable. "Dinner." "Is this a project meeting?" "No." "A security review?" "No." "Then you should probably be more specific." Noah looked directly at me. "I want to take you on a date, but you don't have to answer right now." I smiled. "Why do you give me so much time for every decision?" "Because I don't want to answer for you." Our first date was at a small restaurant next to my father's radio station. There was no expensive menu, no reporters, no one discussed company valuations. Noah ordered the wrong meal. I knocked over my water. We argued for 20 minutes about a terrible movie. It was the first time in years that I sat with a man without worrying that my words might disappoint him. I could disagree. I could change my mind. I could say I did not feel like seeing him that day, and when I missed him, I could be the one who called. A year and a half later, Noah proposed. He did it inside my father's recording studio. No one else was there. Every microphone was turned off. Our phones were sitting on the table. He took out the ring but did not immediately ask me to marry him. "First," he said, "nothing is being recorded. There is no live stream. No one is waiting for your answer. You can answer today, tomorrow, or you can say no." I looked at him. "You planned this for so long and that's all you're going to say?" "There's one more part, then say it." He took a breath. Maya read, would you choose to keep using your own voice and build a life with me? I didn't count to 5, I said yes, our wedding was small. My father sat in the front row. Tessa helped me arrange my veil. Several people from Own Voice attended too. Before the ceremony, the officiant asked whether we wanted our vows recorded. Noah and I answered at the same time. No. Some words do not need to be preserved forever. They only need to be truly heard when they are spoken. People often ask whether discovering that my husband had cloned my voice was the most frightening experience of my life. It was frightening, but the thing that scared me most was not that artificial intelligence could imitate me. It was that in my real life, I had slowly become someone who no longer spoke. To protect my marriage, I avoided conflict. To support my husband, I hid my work. To keep the company moving, I kept telling myself I would deal with my feelings later. Eventually, even I forgot that I had the right to say no. Technology can copy the sound of a person's voice. It can copy their pauses. It can even copy the way they breathe while crying. But it cannot truly copy a person's choice. The voice in that live stream sounded exactly like mine, but it was not me. The real me would never willingly give away my company, she would never agree to be erased, and she would never again confuse silence with proof of love. I finally understand that loving someone can cost time, it can require patience, compromise, and the strength to walk beside someone during the hardest part of their life. But love should never cost you your voice, it should never cost you your boundaries, and it should never give someone else the right to decide who you are supposed to become. Someone who truly loves you will not feel threatened because you have your own opinions. They will not rush to answer when you are still thinking. They will wait, they will listen until you finish, and they will respect the answer that truly belongs to you. My voice was stolen, but what I took back was more than a recording. I took back my right to be angry, my right to refuse, my right to change my mind, and my courage to love someone again without losing myself. My mother used to say, Maybird, count to 5. Then answer in your own voice. Now I finally understand what she was trying to teach me. Not every answer has to be perfect, but every answer should belong to me.